I can't explain it, but he's been here the whole time. No one believed me. My wife thought I was crazy, but she's been here the whole time. My son, Dale, was 5 years old when he disappeared. We were in the park next to our apartment when it happened. Park might be too big a word for it, but that's what Dale always calls it. It was a large plastic structure with several slides, a climbing wall, and a sand pit. Everything was surrounded by a 15 by 15 fence, with some benches for the parents to sit on. That was where I was browsing Reddit and finishing my cigarette that day. Dale was playing with some neighborhood kids, their parents sitting on other benches, so they wouldn't have to breathe my smoke. I looked up in time and saw them going under the play structure to an area called the cave. The cave is an enclosed area under the structure, with a ceiling that was comfortably close for a child and quite claustrophobic for an adult. I heard my phone beep and looked down to see a text from my wife. She had just gotten home from work and wanted Dale and me to come over to help with the groceries. So, I threw my cigarette over the fence and called Dale. "Come on, Dale. Mother wants us home." My calls went unanswered. "Come on, Dale. If you can't listen, we can't come back tomorrow." Usually this brings him running. Playing outside was his favorite pastime, but I still haven't heard back. Then both of his teammates came out giggling and laughing and making every play, and I asked them where Dale had gone. "Mitter Douth is still in the cave," said Alicia, a dark-haired girl missing her front teeth. So I lowered my nearly 6-foot frame, peered into the dark underbelly of the play structure, and asked Dale to come out. "Come on, Dale. We have to go. Mom is waiting for us." I still didn't think anything was wrong other than Dale trying to squeeze a few more minutes into the game. I expected him to laugh and stick his head out and chase me away or crawl into a cave. He knew it would be as funny as I did to see me try to get under the structure to get him out, and it was a game we played often. Instead, there was only silence. So, I sighed and bent over the wet sand to crawl under and get him. I heard the laughter of the other two parents who were watching me, my back scraping at the bottom of the structure as I crawled toward the entrance of the cave. I didn't mind playing with Dale, but this was a bit much. I was exhausted from the night shift the day before, and my back hurt from lifting all night. I skipped the tough talk with Dale on the way home about my not listening and crawled into the dark opening of the cave. As I passed out of the bright world into the darkness of the cave, the afternoon sun shone on my face from the slats of the structure. I felt crawling on my neck. I thought I might have picked up the spider and put a hand on the spot to dislodge it. Nothing was there, but the feeling wouldn't subside. I felt my hooks rise, that ancient sense of a nearby predator threatening me, and it took everything I had to drag myself through space. It was only about 5 feet of darkness, a naturally dark space, but it was the strangest thing I had felt in years. Was it always this dark here? I had crawled through here before, but I didn't remember it being this black. Worse, I didn't feel alone here. Of course, I'm not, I reminded myself. I came here to get Dale. However, as I crawled, I began to doubt that my son was still here, and the feeling that something else lived here was not easily dismissed. I felt that something loathsome lived here, something that was hungry and sleepy even now. My goal went from taking Dale out to getting out of space, and I came out the other side expecting to be drawn back in and consumed. I stood up and wiped the dirt from my knees. It could easily be mistaken for effort, but I'd be a fool to pretend it was anything but fear. At that point, I expected my son to come out and laugh at his silly old dad, but he was still nowhere to be found. Hearing the rough quality of my voice, the other parent looked up and got up to see if everything was okay. "I can't find my son," I told them. Just as I was freaking out, my wife got up, and she must have sensed my concern when she saw me. Then he called the police, and as I ran to check the woods, I first heard him say that disgusting phrase. "Our son is missing. Please send help." 30 minutes later, 2 cars stopped, and some officers came to help. I had searched behind the apartments, in the surrounding dry woods, around the small pond that I always try to keep Dale away from. And when I saw doors, I was about to start knocking. They wanted to speak to me. I was the last person to see Dale, and the officer in charge sent 2 of his men to check the neighboring houses to question me a few minutes later. Where had I seen it? What was he wearing? Was anyone around suspicious? Who were his companions? If he went, where could he go? Did he run away often? And they always assured me that they would find him and not to panic. I answered their questions honestly, but I knew he couldn't leave the playground. Dale was small for his age. I told them, and despite all my misgivings about the apartment we lived in, they did one thing for which I thanked them. The gate latch was too heavy for little Tyke to open. Dale had struggled with it before, and I knew he couldn't leave without help. Other parents said they didn't see him out that day or see anyone lurking at the playground. So, the police searched. They searched the playground, the surrounding apartments, the woods, and the entire area, basically repacking the ground I had already walked. As night fell, they called in more officers to begin a wider operation. My wife and I were worried. Dale was our first and only child, but as the days passed, it seemed less and less likely that he would be found. I'm not ashamed to say that I took Dale's disappearance the wrong way. My wife was stoic about it all, but I knew she was hurting too. He was her baby. She had carried him for 9 months, but I think she saw a lot of her grief because I was struggling. I became like a ghost in my own house. I finally went back to work, but my performance suffered. Loading the stuff into the truck just takes a bit of effort, but I fell behind, missed quotas, and built the trucks late. Fortunately, the supervisor was also from the primary school and saw that I was not well. He suggested counseling and told me it might help, but I didn't want to share my problems with a stranger. A year passed, my wife and I drifted apart as the days went by. And as the anniversary of Dale's disappearance approached, I finally really messed things up at work. I can't even say it wasn't my fault because it totally was. I was working a lift, which I had done since I got my license at 19, and I hit a riser as I was backing up with the load. It wasn't a bad hit, just a hit, but that particular riser's legs, as it turned out, were ready to give way. The riser collapsed spectacularly, and when it fell on one of my colleagues. He lived. They managed to remove the pallets from him before they crushed him, but he broke his collarbone and had to be hospitalized. My supervisor was angry, but I could tell he was trying to contain my sadness. I recommend 2 weeks of unpaid leave. If it were anyone else, I'd give them their marching papers right here and now, but I know you need help more than a trip to unemployment. These 2 weeks, consider it, get your life in order and get back to work. If it happens again, mate, I have no choice. I could not look at him. His pity was worse than his anger, and I knew I had to do something. I nodded my thanks, and he showed me out of his office. I spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what to say to my wife, and I couldn't find anything. He's going to be mad, probably mad enough to finally leave me, but when the sun started peeking over the horizon, I knew there was nothing else I could do. He was as crazy as I thought, but looking at his pity was as hard as my supervisors had seen. She's gone, Dale's gone, and martyring yourself over it won't change the fact. You still have insurance. Go get some counseling and realize that I need you not just to work, but back here. I miss him too, but picking at those wounds won't make him better for the sake of both of us. There was something unspoken beneath that statement, and I understood it, but I wasn't sure what to make of it. I spent the next 4 days in silence. I had found my cure at the bottom of a bottle, something I had avoided until that moment. With no job to go to, I just stayed home and drank my pain away. The wife's patience was finally exhausted. After 2 days of watching me sink like a whistle on the couch, she told me that she was going to see her mom for a few days and offered to help me tidy up while she was away. If I come home and you're still like this, I can't promise I'll be back for a long time. When he left, I spent most of my days in a fermented haze. So it was that on the 5th day, when I told Dale we had to leave, I found myself buzzing and sitting on the same bench I had been sitting on. It was early afternoon, and the playground was thankfully empty. It wasn't the first time I'd come to sit here, and other parents often found an excuse to go with their kids as I was overwhelmed with grief. I was a grieving father returning to the place that had suffered the most, and I really hoped the park would be empty when I got here. Even in my current state, I didn't want anyone to see me like this. It was embarrassing, and it might scare some of the kids if I came knitting to the park smelling of distillery. I was staring at the structure of the game and thought to myself that it might be time to get some help when I first saw it. It was only 8 words, but they sobered me up faster than any cold shower. Next to one of the slides, in rough marker, someone had written, "Where did you go, Dad? I miss you." I sat there staring at it for an eternity, and as the tears came, so did the alcohol. My tears fell naked into the mass of patience sitting between my legs. But as the anger boiled over, I felt them almost burn. Someone was making fun of me, making fun of losing my son, and as I walked to the super office, I was more mad than I had any right to be. Mr. Winters, the genius of the series, always reminded me of one of the hobbits from The Lord of the Rings. He was short, fat, with a ring of curly brown hair round the crown of his crown, which grew larger every year. And when he sat at his desk, he looked like a child sitting in his father's chair. He was about to fall out of that chair when I slammed his study door open, and his confused anger turned to fear as he looked into my face. He was a small man, and the sight of a large, angry drunk in his office quickly reminded him of his stature. "I'll take care of this immediately, Mr. Dawes. In the meantime, why don't you go home and rest? You seem to be under the weather." He had the decency not to call me a drunk out in the open, and I conceded the matter as I went home to sober up a little. As night began to fall some undetermined amount of time later, I sat up from the couch and listened to the 5 of 6 stout cans rattle angrily to the floor. By the headache and the mealy taste in my mouth, I had not gone home and sobered up. As I moved into the kitchen to make something for dinner, I remembered the words on the slide and felt angry all over again. As the meat pie I had taken from the freezer spun in the microwave, I wondered if Vinder had taken care of it like he said. I wondered if he would paint over it or wash it off, or how would he do it? Were the words still sitting there on that slide? As the microwave dinged, I resolved to go find out and took my pie and plastic fork on a little field trip. I watched the steam roll off the top as I walked down to the little park, the night air alive with crickets and night birds. It would have been a pretty evening if I hadn't been so in my despair. The trees were losing their autumn leaves, becoming bare and skeletal, and the air was crisp enough to make my undershirt unadvisable. My bare feet slapped at the concrete as I walked away from my flat, and the closer I got, the better the view of the offending slide. The words were gone, the pressure washer having left the slide a little lighter for its efforts. But as I came through the gate, I saw that something else had been added to the side of the structure. It looked like the same marker strokes, the handwriting big and childish, and as I read it, I felt a growl rumble in my throat. "I saw you today, Daddy. I saw you, but you didn't see me." I looked around as the wind rattled the nearby trees, expecting to see a group of snickering youths as they watched me. This had teenagers written all over it, and as the pie slipped out of my hand, I loosed my shout to the sky. Why? Why did they devil me like this? Was this a game to them? When I was a kid, we would have never thought of doing something like this to anyone, let alone a grieving father. The dark offered up no answers, but the side of the play park did when I turned back. Beneath the first message, another smaller message was written in the same childish scrawl. The longer I looked at it, the more I recognized it. How many times had I watched my son scribble words in his reader just that way, filling in the workbook pages in big looping script as he prepared to go to kindergarten? "Daddy, I can see you, but you can't see me. Please help me. It's scary here." I hunkered on my knees in the sand, looking at the words as I ran my fingers over them. They looked just like his, and as I felt a splinter catch in the pad of my thumb, I pulled it back sharply. There was no way he could be here. There was no way he could have been hiding here for a year. But as I watched the play set, I had no doubt that he had written those words. "Dale," I said, my voice quavering as I glanced into the shadowy depths of the playground. "Dale?" I shouted a little louder, casting around as I tried to find him. I walked around to the other side, stumbling in the gritty sand as it sucked at my feet. My head was full of rails, and my words slurred even to my own ears. There were doubtless people looking through their curtains at me as I capered like a sot drunk, but I didn't care. My boy was here. He was here somewhere, and I needed to find him. I tripped then, going face down in the sand, and when I came up, I saw a new message on the wet-looking plastic wood. It was hard to see in the shadow that it sat in, but as I got close, I put my trembling fingers on it to make sure it was real. My fingers came away tacky, the tips black as if they had touched wet marker. "I need you to come get me, Daddy. I'm stuck in the sad swamp, and I need help." "Excuse me, sir? Everything all right there?" As their flashlights hit me, I squinted, but the words were like a brand across my eyes. The sad swamps were what Dale called the swamps of sadness from his favorite movie, The Never-Ending Story. We had watched it about 1,000 times, and when the VHS I had owned as a kid finally broke in the VCR, we had searched for it on DVD until we found it at the local thrift store. He watched it every day before his afternoon nap, and I imagined he could just about quote it word for word. Seeing the words "sad swamps" made me certain it was Dale talking. But how? How could he be talking to me from? The light was right in my face now, and I put up a hand to block it out. Some of your neighbors were worried you were faring poorly, Mr. Dawes. They heard you shouting and wanted us to check on you. They were being kind. It seemed that everyone was being kind these days to poor old drunk Mr. Dawes, but I didn't have time for them. I had seen something under the edge of the play structure, half a word that was buried in shadows. It was his latest message, and as I staggered towards it a little, I hoped it would tell me how to get him back. What happened? One of them asked in his tone jovial as he leaned down. Wife lock you out after you came home, snookered? Well, we can get you a place to sleep it off, sir. Never dash. He had put a hand on my shoulder, but I pulled away from him as I tried to see the words that were beneath the structure. It was just 6 words, but I couldn't see the last one, and the last one seemed the most important. The police grabbed hold of me, but I fought to get away as I tried to see that last word. I got as close as I could, both catching me under an arm as they pulled me away from the structure and finally saw it. I repeated it again and again as they put me in the back of the car. All the fight out of me now, wanted to commit it to memory before my drink-addled brain made a muck of it. We'll phone the missus and let her know she can come pick you up in a tank, Mr. Dawes. If she don't wanna, then I guess you're sobering up on a bench for the night, as long as you don't try any more of that. I ignored them as we left the parking lot, my flat disappearing behind us as I repeated those 6 words like a mantra. Look for me inside the cave. The police hadn't been wrong. My wife was livid. She came down to the station, her clothes clearly thrown on hastily, and glowered at me through the bars of the holding cell. It was just me in there with a few old gaffers, and they were snoring in a corner as I slouched on the bench. I was still imprinting those words into my brain, mumbling them like a magic spell, when I heard her voice and looked up into her scowling face. I can't believe you've done this. It isn't enough that you get sent home from work, that you do nothing but blunder around like an old tramp, and won't get any help to get yourself out of this rut. But now you go and get yourself tossed in the drunk tank. I'm done, Malcolm. Do you understand me? This is the last straw. I won't stay here and watch you destroy yourself. He's alive, I rasped out, and when she looked at me, I saw all the anger leak out of her, only to be replaced with pity. I miss him just as much as you do, but you have to let him go. It's been a year, Malcolm. He's not coming home. It wasn't your fault what happened to him, and you have to stop blaming yourself for it. He's been leaving me messages at the play park, Stephanie. I can prove it. Come with me, and I'll show you. We can find him. We can be a family again. We can, but she cut me off with the first sob I heard from her in months. I'm leaving, Malcolm. When they release you in the morning, don't call me. Go back to the flat. Go to your mother's house. Go to hell for all I care. I can't watch you do this anymore. She left me there with the other drunks, but I had already decided what I had to do. They turned me loose in the morning, and after a brisk walk home, I got the things I'd need. I brought a torch, some string, and a big hunting knife I'd had since I was a teenager and set off for the play park. It was early morning, and I had the place to myself, save for the pigeons still gobbling at my spilled pie's remains. I didn't see any new graffiti, but I didn't need any. I knew where Dale was, and as I got on my hands and knees, I crawled under the playground and into the cave. Even in my assuredness, I felt foolish as I moved into the cave. It was dark, but I could still see the light streaming in from the other end. I didn't feel that same sense of foreboding like I had before, no sense of a monster coming to gobble me up, and I turned on the torch as I checked out the corners. The cave was a box of 4 walls with a roof of thick plastic overhead, and I should have been able to see all 4 walls. 3 of the walls were normal enough, but as I looked to the west-facing wall, I was aware of another opening that led into a space that shouldn't exist. An opening between that led into deeper darkness. As my torch burned against that encroaching blackness, I turned my body in a ponderous circle and started crawling into it. If I meant to get my son back, I would need to hobble into the sad swamp and come out the other side. In contrast to the dark cave behind me, the space I entered was pitch black. The edges of my light curled oddly, the darkness seeming to retract like felt as I moved deeper. I wasn't underground. I was still heading forward, but given the dimensions of the play structure, the place I crawled shouldn't exist. The length was wrong. The longer I crawled, the more I expected to wake up and find that I had fallen asleep in the drunk tank. The space was cramped, but felt vast as it stretched on. It was like an underground cave, the claustrophobic passages threatening to collapse in on you at any minute. Besides being dark, it was also utterly silent. Besides the crunch of my knees as they moved over the sand, no other sound seemed to exist. My own labored breathing seemed to be absorbed by the thick midnight around me, and every painful drag of my body sent a spasm of need through me. It was a primal need, a need to stand to my full height and stretch my arms up high to dissipate the confining gloom that hung around me. The same part of my brain made it pretty clear, however, how bad an idea that would be. What if my hand should pass into that darkness and never return? What if the darkness came back with the hand? I kept crawling into that inky soup, wondering if I would simply wander here forever. It was pitch outside the protective beam of my torch, and with every struggling shuffle, I wondered why I didn't turn out and go back. Nothing could survive down here. Nothing could live in this pitch blackness. If I didn't go back now, I'd never find my way and be forced to wander endlessly in this void until my torch went out. And then what? I knew I wasn't alone when I heard the soft scuff of feet on sand. I looked into the black expanse, expecting to see the beast that had terrified me the last time, and finding nothing. The beam of my torch didn't go very far, but at the end of the light, I could hear the scuff of bare feet on sand. Something was coming towards me, and I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Would it be my son? Or would it be a monster to end my journey? When a dirty, half-starved little boy buried me in a hug that circled my shoulders, I knew I'd found him. "Dale," I whispered, but he could only nod and cry against me. I didn't waste time or breath. I just scooped him up and didn't stop moving until I was back in the lighted world of the play park. As we moved, I could feel that clawing, penetrating glare from behind me. Something had noticed I was taking their prize, and they were unhappy. I kept crawling, kept pulling, but I could hear those scrabbling feet as they kicked up sand. They were getting closer now, their growl loud and thunderous, and on a whim, I turned my torch on them. Bathed in the light, they yelped wildly and kicked up sand as they backpedaled. I didn't dare look to see what had been tailing me. I put on a burst of speed, crawling like our lives depended on it, and when I collapsed in the light of day, I was aware of people shouting at me to get out of there. Their kids were asking who I was and why I was so dirty, and they must have thought I was a bum. When they saw Dale, they tried to take him from me, but I held on like my life depended on it. And when they finally recognized us, I heard their anger turn to surprise. They took us both to the hospital, and I'm glad to say that aside from being underfed and very dirty, Dale was completely fine. My wife came to the hospital, and we both cried as she apologized for doubting me. I refused it, telling her she had nothing to apologize for. I doubted myself. I fell into the bottle and nearly lost myself in my grief. I should be apologizing to you for putting you through all this for the last year. She sat with me at the hospital, both of us afraid to take our eyes off Dale as he sat placidly in his hospital bed. I asked him about what he had gone through, but he couldn't tell me much. He said that he got lost in the cave, and he crawled and crawled until he came out in the play park again. Only it wasn't his play park. The play park he found was different, and me and his friends were gone. The sky was sort of purple, and the clouds were too thick looking to be real. I couldn't get the gate open, but that was probably good. There were these big things that would come by like living shadows, and they would look at me like how we look at animals in the zoo. I drank some water from a gross puddle, but there was no food. I sometimes went to sleep in the caves, but I always felt like something was watching me there. It never tried to hurt me, but it always felt like I was hiding and waiting for someone to catch me. I thought I was going to starve before I heard you breathing in the cave. I had run away to get away from some shadowy people who were looking at me, and I heard you down there and wanted to see what the sound was. I asked him about the messages, and he said he'd found a marker of some sort in the sand in the other play park. That was about the time he'd started seeing a shadow inside the park. I knew it was you, I just knew it. But you couldn't see me. So I started leaving messages, hoping you would find them. I guess you must have. The strangest part is that Dale swears that he was only there for a week. He says he kept going back into the cave, but that he only slept a few times while he was away. What's more, the doctors say he doesn't appear to have grown any in the time he was gone. His dental records and growth structure are the same as they were at his last checkup about a month before he disappeared. I'm glad to have Dale back, but I don't let him play in the cave anymore. We still visit the play park, and I still let him slide on the slides and run on the structure like he used to, but he is forbidden to go underneath anymore. It's a rule he doesn't mind following, lest he get lost in those dark tunnels for a second time.